In today's episode, we're diving into the most shocking pet attacks ever recorded. From rampaging chimpanzees to keeping tigers at home to being strangled by horrific snakes. Let's get right into it. 10-year-old Lily Morgan lived in a sprawling countryside home in rural Pennsylvania with her parents Robert and Catherine. The Morgans were wealthy pharmaceutical executives who traveled frequently for business, leaving Lily in the care of various babysitters. What made the Morgan household unique, however, was Max, a 7-year-old male chimpanzee that Robert had purchased as an exotic pet when Lily was just 5. Robert had always been fascinated by primates. When the opportunity arose to purchase a baby chimp from a bankrupt zoo in 2001, he jumped at the chance, ignoring Catherine's concerns. Robert insisted that he be like a brother to Lily, and that these animals are incredibly intelligent. With proper care, they're perfectly safe. For the first few years, Max was indeed the perfect companion. He was playful, affectionate, and seemed to adore Lily. The Morgans spared no expense for their unusual family member, building a spacious enclosure attached to the house with climbing structures, toys, and even a small swimming pool. Max had his own bedroom, complete with a custom-built bed and television. He ate at the dinner table with the family, using utensils and drinking from a glass. Visitors to the Morgan home were always astonished by how human-like Max behaved. But as Max entered adolescence, subtle changes began to emerge in his behavior. He became more territorial about his living space and possessions. There were incidents, small at first, that the Morgans dismissed or rationalized away. Max had torn apart a couch when left alone too long. He'd bitten Catherine when she tried to take away a chocolate bar he'd stolen from the pantry. He'd thrown a tantrum when Lily had friends over, forcing the playdate to end early. Robert often reassured that Max was simply going through a phase, just like any teenager. Catherine, however, had her doubts. She had been reading about chimpanzees and knew they became stronger and more unpredictable with age. The thought of finding Max a sanctuary had crossed her mind more than once, but Robert dismissed the idea, believing Max was part of the family. On a crisp autumn morning in October 2005, the Morgans prepared for an overnight business trip to New York City. They had arranged for Jessica Winters, a 23-year-old graduate student from the local university, to babysit Lily. Jessica had babysat Lily several times before, and the Morgans trusted her around Max. She wasn't easily rattled by animals and had even worked at a local wildlife center, which reassured Robert that she'd handle things just fine. At the time, regulations on exotic pet ownership were weak, allowing families like the Morgans to keep dangerous animals with little oversight. While some states required permits, many had no restrictions at all, treating primates like household pets rather than unpredictable wild animals. It wasn't until high-profile attacks like the tragedy that would soon unfold in the Morgan home that lawmakers began pushing for stricter bans on private ownership of chimpanzees and other dangerous wildlife. Before leaving, Catherine handed Jessica a detailed list of instructions, outlining Lily's schedule, which was posted on the fridge. Max usually stayed in his enclosure when they were away, but there was a note that he might get lonely. If he seemed calm, he would be let inside for an hour or so in the afternoon. Jessica responded with confidence, assuring Catherine that she and Max got along well. As the Morgans' car disappeared down the driveway, Jessica turned to Lily with a smile, suggesting a movie marathon or baking cookies. But Lily's gaze drifted to Max's enclosure, visible through the large windows. The chimpanzee was watching them intently, his dark eyes tracking their every move, waiting. Lily eagerly chose baking, mentioning that Max loved cookies. The morning passed pleasantly with chocolate chip cookies, board games, and the first Harry Potter movie. But by early afternoon, Max's hooting grew louder, more insistent. Something felt off. Lily brushed it off, explaining he always got restless around this time and that her father usually let him in. Jessica hesitated, remembering Catherine's warning. Max could only come inside if he was calm. She asked if this was normal. Lily reassured her it was just his way of seeking attention. Jessica would soon realize how wrong she was. Against her better judgment, she followed Lily to the back door. As they approached, Max fell eerily silent, waiting by the entrance. Lily insisted he was fine. After a brief hesitation, Jessica unlocked the door. Max entered without issue, hugging Lily before settling on the couch with a picture book. Everything seemed normal. Then Jessica excused herself to use the bathroom. She asked if Lily would be okay for a moment. The girl, still beside Max, confirmed that they were just reading. Jessica had barely closed the door upstairs when a high-pitched scream sliced through the air, freezing her in place. She bolted down the stairs 2 at a time. The sight in the living room would haunt her forever. Max had transformed completely. His hair stood on end, his lips pulled back in a terrifying grimace. He had Lily pinned to the floor, his powerful hands gripping her arms. Blood streamed from a bite wound on Lily's cheek. Jessica screamed at Max, grabbing a nearby lamp and throwing it at the chimp. The lamp struck Max's back, causing him to release Lily momentarily. He turned toward Jessica, letting out a guttural scream that seemed to shake the walls. In that brief moment, Lily scrambled away, blood streaming down her face. Jessica yelled for Lily to run and lock herself in her parents' bedroom, positioning herself between the girl and the enraged chimp. Lily bolted for the stairs, but Max was faster. With incredible speed, he intercepted her at the bottom of the staircase, grabbing her by the hair and pulling her backward with such force that Jessica heard the sickening crack of Lily's head hitting the hardwood floor. Jessica lunged forward, desperate to help. She grabbed a fire poker from beside the fireplace and swung it at Max, connecting with his shoulder. The chimp howled in pain but didn't retreat. Instead, he charged at Jessica, knocking her to the ground with such force that the air was driven from her lungs. As she gasped for breath, Jessica fumbled for her phone in her pocket. Max turned his attention back to Lily, who lay motionless at the bottom of the stairs. The chimp began dragging her across the floor toward the kitchen. With trembling fingers, Jessica dialed 911 and frantically explained the emergency. She dropped the phone and staggered to her feet. From the kitchen came sounds that would forever be seared into her memory. The wet, tearing sounds of flesh and bone, punctuated by Max's frenzied grunts. She grabbed a heavy crystal vase from a side table and crept toward the kitchen doorway. What she saw made her vomit instantly. Max was hunched over Lily's small form, his hands and face covered in blood. The child's face was unrecognizable, her small body limp and still. Jessica hurled the vase with all her strength. It shattered against Max's back, sending shards of crystal flying. The chimp whirled around, his eyes wild with rage. He charged at Jessica, who turned and ran for the front door. Her fingers fumbled with the locks as Max's footsteps thundered behind her. Just as she yanked the door open, she felt his powerful hands grip her from behind. His teeth sank into her shoulder, tearing through muscle and tendon. The pain was blinding, white-hot, and all-consuming. Somehow, through sheer adrenaline, Jessica managed to elbow him with her other arm and break free. She stumbled outside, falling down the front steps, crawling across the gravel driveway as blood poured from her shoulder. Behind her, Max stood in the doorway, his massive frame silhouetted against the light from inside. For a moment, he seemed to consider pursuing her, but then he turned and disappeared back into the house. Jessica dragged herself to the road before collapsing, where a passing motorist found her and called for help. By the time emergency responders arrived, she had lost consciousness from the blood loss. Inside the Morgan home, officers discovered a scene of unimaginable horror. Lily's body lay in the kitchen, brutally mutilated. Max had retreated to his enclosure, but when officers approached, he charged, forcing them to shoot him. The Morgans returned to a nightmare. Lily was gone, their home a crime scene. The investigation revealed Max had shown increasing aggression in the weeks prior. The housekeeper recalled his possessiveness over Lily, sometimes preventing others from approaching her. A veterinarian had even recommended medication, but Robert dismissed the warning. Grief tore the Morgans apart. Within a year, they divorced. Robert moved away, unable to face the memories, while Catherine buried herself in community outreach programs, trying to rebuild her life in a way that made sense without Lily. The Morgan tragedy was a stark warning. Chimpanzees are never truly tame. But Max was not an anomaly. Across the world, others learned the same brutal lesson. June 2, 2015 was already hot by mid-morning in the rural outskirts of Ocala, Florida. The cicadas had started early, buzzing through the palmettos, and the air inside the single-story home on Lake Eaton Road was thick with humidity and the faint, sour scent of reptile musk. Windows were shut tight, blankets had been tacked over them to block sunlight. Inside, the rooms were dim and cramped, lined wall-to-wall with stacked terrariums, mismatched heat lamps, and makeshift shelving covered in feeding charts, molted skins, and empty syringes. The man who lived there was 61-year-old Carl Dempsey, and he hadn't let an inspector through that door in over a decade. But that morning, something would finally get out, and help would come too late. Carl had once worked in landscaping, but after an injury in his late 40s, he withdrew from most public life. He sold his equipment, stopped answering phone calls from extended family, and poured everything into his true passion: snakes. Reticulated pythons, gaboon vipers, timber rattlesnakes, corn snakes. He didn't just keep them, he bred them, traded them, studied them obsessively. Most were acquired through back channels, online forums, private dealers, message boards, where exotic reptile owners swapped advice, photos, and the occasional illegal specimen. Florida's laws had changed in 2010, tightening restrictions on venomous snakes and requiring permits for certain species. Carl had ignored them. He stopped renewing licenses, refused to register new additions, and ranted online about government overreach. In the tight-knit world of underground herpetology, he was known as a purist, someone who believed in personal responsibility over regulation. He didn't see it as dangerous, he saw it as freedom. On that Tuesday, one of Carl's few in-person friends, 44-year-old Dave Holbrook, arrived for a visit. The two had met years earlier on a reptile enthusiast message board and bonded over a shared love of rare species. Dave didn't keep venomous snakes himself, but he admired Carl's collection, and Carl loved showing it off. That morning, after coffee and a half-hearted discussion about caging upgrades, Carl led Dave into the back room where the real show began. He opened the lid of a glass enclosure and reached inside. Coiled beneath a fake log was a West African bush viper, small, iridescent, and deceptively calm. Its emerald green scales shimmered under the red heat lamp, and for a moment the snake didn't move. Carl extended his hand confidently, intending to guide it out with a hook, but opted instead for his usual bare hand method. As his fingers hovered over the coils, the viper lashed out. It struck faster than either man could register. The motion was so fast, so fluid, that it was almost over before it began. Just a flash of movement and the sharp pop of fangs breaking skin. The snake latched onto the knuckle of Carl's left index finger and held it for nearly 2 seconds, jaws clamped tight, before retreating back into the shadows of the enclosure. Carl recoiled instantly, swearing, blood running down the side of his hand. The bite marks were clean but deep, 2 dark punctures already beginning to swell. He squeezed the wound, cursing again, and tried to laugh it off, waving away Dave's concern. But Dave had seen the strike. He knew enough about venomous snakes to recognize what they were dealing with, and it wasn't a dry bite. Within minutes, Carl's hand began to change. The skin around the bite turned red, then purple, then nearly black. His fingers stiffened, curling involuntarily, and the veins in his wrist bulged beneath the surface. Dave hovered anxiously, urging him to call for help, but Carl refused, shaking his head and stumbling to the kitchen to grab his makeshift first aid supplies. His attempt to treat the bite was crude. He rinsed the wound under cold water, applied antibiotic ointment, and wrapped it in gauze that quickly soaked through with blood. He had no anti-venom, few private keepers did, and even fewer had the legal ability to store or administer it. Instead, he downed 2 Benadryl tablets and poured himself half a glass of whiskey, muttering that it would all blow over. But it didn't. By the 40-minute mark, the swelling had spread past his elbow. His breathing grew shallow and sweat beaded on his forehead as his body temperature began to drop. He vomited twice, collapsing onto the floor and groaning in pain. His vision blurred, and when he tried to sit up, he collapsed again, this time harder. His hand, now 3 times its normal size, had turned nearly blue. Dave begged him to let him call 911, but Carl grew angry, panicked in a way Dave hadn't seen before. He muttered about the state taking his snakes, about raids and citations, about everything he'd built being destroyed. He said it wasn't worth it. He said he just needed to rest. And then he passed out. Right there on the linoleum floor, his arm grotesquely swollen and leaking blood through the gauze. His lips had turned pale, his breathing was ragged, shallow, and spaced unevenly. At 3:40 p.m., after watching Carl seize violently and lose consciousness again, Dave finally picked up the phone and made the call, ignoring his friend's warnings and deciding that saving his life mattered more than protecting his illegal hobby. Paramedics arrived 9 minutes later, forced to enter through the back door when no one answered. They found Carl on the living room floor, unresponsive, his arm mottled and swollen nearly to the shoulder. He was barely breathing. They attempted resuscitation on site and administered epinephrine and fluids. But by the time the ambulance reached the hospital, Carl had gone into full cardiac arrest. He was pronounced dead at 4:32 p.m. Inside the home, first responders found over 70 snakes, several venomous, most improperly housed, and none legally documented. Animal control officers were called in to begin the process of identifying and removing the reptiles. Some were euthanized on the spot, others were transferred to wildlife sanctuaries and research centers. The entire house was deemed a biohazard. Carl's collection, his obsession, was dismantled within 48 hours. There was no funeral, no obituary. Dave provided a statement to authorities and quietly deleted his forum accounts a few weeks later. Online, in the darker corners of the reptile community, a few posts appeared mourning Carl's death. Others called him a martyr, someone who had died for the freedom to keep what he loved. But outside that world, the story was simple. A man ignored the law. He kept dangerous animals in secret, and when one of them bit him, he refused the help that could have saved his life. Not because there wasn't time, not because help didn't come, but because he didn't want anyone to know. It was a hot, oppressive morning on the 10th of January 2019 when DC, a 44-year-old wildlife research scientist, arrived at the CV Yoshiki laboratory in Indonesia. The sun rose over the sprawling Pearl Farm, casting long shadows over the murky swamps where a collection of crocodiles basked lazily in the heat. The laboratory, situated within the farm, was home to a group of illegally kept crocodiles that spent their days sunbathing by the water. Among them was Mary, a 17-foot, 1,300-pound creature with a reputation that preceded her. Known for her ferocity and cunning, Mary had become a spectacle, her incredible size and strength drawing awe from those who observed her. DC had long been fascinated by the ancient reptiles, and as an animal lover, feeding them was a ritual she enjoyed. Her routine was predictable. She would arrive early, the first employee at the lab, bringing fresh cuts of meat for the crocodiles. Mary was always the first she fed, her powerful body often propelling herself out of the water to snatch the meat from mid-air with lightning speed. The crocodile was a marvel to DC, a testament to nature's raw power and efficiency. It was a graceful yet dangerous dance between them, the ritual repeated with reverence on both sides. That morning, DC approached the enclosure with a bucket of meat, her attention drawn to the crocodile's fluid movements, a constant reminder of its predatory nature. The sun cast a golden glow on Mary's scaly hide as it locked its beady eyes on the offering. DC carefully raised a chunk of meat over the 8-foot-tall wall. She had done this countless times, always careful, always mindful of the danger. But that day, in her awe, she let her guard down. With a sudden flick of its powerful tail, Mary surged upward, leaping toward the meat. DC's hand, which was too low, was within reach. The crocodile's teeth, razor-sharp and deadly, sank into her flesh with terrifying precision. DC screamed, the pain immediate and blinding. Mary, with blistering speed, yanked her over the wall and into the enclosure. The ground beneath DC cracked as she collided with the concrete floor. Pain exploded through her body, but before she could even react, Mary twisted her body with frightening precision, performing the death roll. DC's body was wrenched and tossed like a rag doll, bones cracking, blood spilling across the floor. Her screams were swallowed by the sound of crushing bone and tearing flesh. Mary's cold eyes never left her, unblinking and unyielding. DC's strength faded, her cries becoming weaker as the crocodile continued its brutal assault. Her left arm, the first to be torn away, disappeared down the creature's throat, swallowed whole. The crushing, twisting agony of the attack overwhelmed DC's senses. She was now bleeding profusely, struggling to stay conscious. As her body was lifted and slammed again, she realized she had no chance of escape. With a surge of desperation, she scrambled to her feet, searching for anything to help her flee. Her remaining arm was barely functional, but she pushed herself toward the enclosure wall, hoping for a crack or ledge to grip onto. The wall was smooth, the surface offering nothing. The momentary hope faded as her strength drained away. Without warning, DC slipped. She fell into the murky waters below, now fully immersed in Mary's domain. The water churned with blood as the crocodile moved in. Mary's movements were swift and deliberate as she entered the water. DC flailed her remaining arm, desperate to paddle toward safety. But the water was not her ally. This was Mary's world, and the crocodile was a master of it. With terrifying speed, Mary closed the distance, clamping her jaws around DC's torso. The crunch of her ribs breaking echoed through the water, and DC's screams rang out, a futile cry for help. The blood in the water was unmistakable. DC fought, her body convulsing as the crocodile dragged her deeper. Mary's grip tightened and the water began to fill DC's lungs. She could feel her life slipping away, the weight of the creature pulling her down, her vision blurring. Her mind screamed for air, for salvation, but there was none. The murky depths became her tomb. Horrified, the staff stood frozen as the crocodile emerged from the water, the mangled remains of their colleague still held tightly in her jaws. The terror was palpable as they watched the creature drag the lifeless body onto the concrete floor, leaving a trail of blood behind. DC's left hand had been severed and her torso was barely recognizable. Panic set in as the staff hesitated to enter the enclosure. They called the authorities, Tomboriri police and officials from the North Sulawesi Natural Resources Conservation Agency. The rescue team arrived, but when they approached the crocodile, Mary reacted violently, thrashing her tail and hissing in warning. She was not ready to give up her kill. With caution, the team sedated Mary and transported her to a wildlife rescue facility, where it was confirmed she had consumed DC's body. Staff at the CV Yoshiki laboratory described DC as a quiet lady who loved animals. They were deeply devastated by the death of the head of the lab. However, they noted with concern how Mary had shown prior signs of aggression, having previously attacked and killed another crocodile that had ventured into her pool. The farm's owner, a Japanese national, was arrested for illegally keeping crocodiles and sentenced to 10 years for his reckless disregard that led to DC's death. Evening of March 15, 2011 settled over the suburbs outside Brisbane, Australia, with the glow of streetlights flickering on and the distant hum of televisions filtering through open windows. The air was warm, heavy with the scent of dry grass and barbecue smoke, a typical late summer night in Queensland. In a quiet neighborhood lined with modest brick houses, 34-year-old Marcus Davidson welcomed a small group of friends into his backyard. 8 guests gathered, beers in hand, the sounds of casual laughter filling the night. It was meant to be a simple get-together, but Marcus had invited them for something special, a demonstration he had been eager to show off for months. For the past 2 years, Marcus had been raising Artemis, a 150-pound wolf-dog hybrid. The massive animal, with silver-gray fur and piercing yellow eyes, was the centerpiece of Marcus's fascination with owning something wild. He spoke about Artemis as if he were something rare and mystical, a creature few could ever truly understand. To Marcus, Artemis wasn't just a pet. He was proof that a man could tame the untamable. Marcus Davidson had always lived an ordinary life. Born and raised in Toowoomba, Queensland, he worked as a postal supervisor, played sports on weekends, and was known among friends for hosting backyard barbecues. He had never owned a pet as a child. His mother had been allergic, but after his 2008 divorce, something changed. He started seeking excitement, talking about taking risks, living life differently. That was when he found Artemis. The wolf dog had been listed on a classified site, described vaguely as a timber wolf mix by a breeder in rural Queensland. The photo showed an enormous, wild-looking animal, unlike anything Marcus had seen before. He was immediately drawn to its exotic appearance, imagining how impressive it would be to own something so powerful. Without experience in handling large predators, he purchased Artemis and had him delivered. He told friends it was like having a piece of the wild in his backyard. But wolf-dog hybrids are not fully domesticated animals. Weighing between 130 and 175 pounds, they retain the instincts of wild wolves, including territorial aggression and an unpredictable prey drive. Their jaw strength exceeds 400 pounds per square inch, more than enough to crush bone, and their intelligence allows them to escape enclosures that would contain ordinary dogs. Unlike fully domesticated breeds, wolf hybrids do not recognize humans as leaders in the way dogs do. They can be affectionate one moment and triggered into a full predatory response the next. In most Australian states, wolf dog hybrids are illegal, but underground breeders continue to supply them to inexperienced owners. Marcus had no formal training, no specialized knowledge, and no permits. What he had was confidence, and a belief that his bond with Artemis made him different from other owners. The warning signs came early. Trevor Wilson, his next-door neighbor, recalled seeing Artemis pace along the fence line whenever children passed, his yellow eyes tracking them in eerie silence. In November 2010, Marcus required stitches after Artemis bit through his forearm, tearing through skin and muscle. 2 months later, the wolf dog escaped his enclosure and attacked a neighbor's Labrador, forcing 3 men to pull them apart. Veterinarian Dr. Rajiv Patel, who treated Artemis after the dog attack, warned Marcus directly. The animal displayed clear predatory behaviors and should not be kept in a residential area. Marcus dismissed the concern, saying Artemis was just playing rough. On March 15, 2011, Marcus invited 8 friends over for drinks and a special demonstration. Witnesses later stated that Marcus had been drinking heavily, boasting about how well-trained Artemis had become. At 8:32 p.m., he led the group outside to the 1,000 square foot enclosure, where security cameras recorded the entire event. The wolf dog was already inside, pacing the perimeter, ears flat, tail stiff. His posture was tense, his hackles raised. A warning Marcus either failed to notice or ignored. He turned to his friends, grinning, and stepped inside the enclosure. For 2 minutes, Marcus crouched beside Artemis, running a hand along the thick fur at the base of his neck, speaking in a low, steady voice as the wolf dog paced in place. He had done this many times before, letting Artemis settle before guiding him into what he called their trust exercises. Moments where he would gently grip the animal's scruff or place a hand on his muzzle to show his dominance. His friends watched in silence, some with amusement, others with unease, as Marcus shifted his weight, preparing for the next step. He was going to have Artemis sit beside him, lean into his touch, and allow Marcus to momentarily place a hand over his snout, proof in his mind that their bond was unbreakable. But as he reached forward, Artemis stiffened, his body going rigid, ears pinning flat against his skull. To Marcus, it was hesitation, a sign that he needed to reassure the animal. But to Artemis, this movement was a challenge, one that required an immediate and violent response. Artemis clamped his jaws around Marcus's throat, his powerful teeth crushing the windpipe instantly. Marcus staggered backward, arms flailing, his friends frozen in shock. As Marcus fell, the wolf dog shook his head violently, the instinctive motion of a predator breaking the neck of its prey. The enclosure erupted into chaos. One guest threw a chair against the fence, another grabbed a garden hose, spraying water in a desperate attempt to distract Artemis. Nothing worked. By 8:39 p.m., Marcus had stopped moving, but the attack didn't end. With his prey motionless, Artemis began tearing into Marcus's abdomen and upper thigh, ripping through muscle and crushing bone with single-minded focus. Blood soaked into the dirt, and his friends finally realized they were watching their friend being eaten alive. Jessica Taylor, one of the friends, managed to dial emergency services at 8:40 p.m., her voice barely comprehensible through panic. First responders arrived at 8:56 p.m., but the enclosure was still too dangerous to enter. Artemis stood over Marcus's body, his ears flat, fur bristling, guarding his kill. It took 3 tranquilizer darts to subdue him. Even as the sedatives took effect, he continued licking the blood from his muzzle. By the time paramedics reached Marcus nearly 30 minutes later, he was pronounced dead at the scene. The autopsy later confirmed that Marcus had died from massive blood loss and asphyxiation. Defensive wounds on his hands and arms showed his desperate attempts to fight back, but Artemis's bite had crushed his trachea within seconds. The medical examiner estimated that 5 to 7 pounds of tissue had been consumed from his abdomen, chest, and legs. Queensland wildlife authorities euthanized Artemis the following day. In the days following the attack, Marcus's friends struggled to process what they had witnessed. Some refused to speak about it, shaken by the sheer brutality of the moment, while others replayed it in their minds, questioning if there had been any warning signs they had missed. The group that had once gathered regularly in his backyard for barbecues and casual drinks now found themselves avoiding the place altogether, unable to shake the memory of that night. Within the local community, the news spread quickly, with neighbors expressing a mix of shock and unease. Some had heard Artemis's deep guttural howls at night, but never imagined the wolf dog would turn on its owner. Others admitted they had always been wary of the animal, recalling the way it paced along the fence line, watching passers-by with an intensity that never felt quite right. The tragedy reignited concerns over exotic pet ownership, particularly the unchecked breeding and sale of wolf hybrids. Wildlife officials began cracking down on illegal breeders in the area, but no immediate legislation was passed to prevent similar cases in the future. For those who had known Marcus personally, his death served as a grim reminder that no amount of trust or familiarity could strip a predator of its instincts. Artemis had not acted out of malice or rage, only nature. The early morning sun on September 14, 2016, filtered through the dense pine forests, casting long shadows across the quiet rural roads of eastern North Carolina. The air was thick with late summer humidity, and the only sounds to be heard were the Carolina chickadees calling from the treetops. Here, in a secluded town just over 2 hours east of Charlotte, stretches of farmland and woodland separated small communities where neighbors rarely questioned what went on behind closed doors. It was the kind of place where someone could live in near isolation, undisturbed, even if they kept an apex predator in their home. At the edge of one such road, Olivia Carter's house sat tucked away behind a gravel driveway, hidden from view by a dense wall of trees. At 37 years old, Olivia had built a life of independence. She was unmarried, had no children, and worked a remote corporate job that gave her financial stability without the need to leave her property. That same financial freedom had also allowed her to pursue something far more unusual: the private ownership of a wild animal. For the past 2 years, she had shared her home with Kai, a 42-pound African caracal, a species known for its lethal hunting skills, powerful build, and unmatched agility. Unlike most exotic animal owners, Olivia hadn't built a secure outdoor enclosure or kept Kai in a controlled space. He had full reign of the house. She believed their bond made her different from other owners. But on that quiet September morning, Kai would prove that no amount of human care could override the instincts of a predator. Caracals are native to Africa, the Middle East, and parts of Asia, built for hunting with razor-sharp claws, powerful hind legs, and keen predatory instincts. Unlike domesticated cats, caracals retain their wild nature, even when raised from birth. They strike with precision, their bite force strong enough to crush bone, and their coiled muscles give them the ability to leap over 10 feet into the air, a skill designed for taking down birds but just as effective on larger prey. Despite these facts, Olivia never saw Kai as a threat. She had imported him from a breeder outside the US, spending thousands of dollars on transport and veterinary clearances to bring him into North Carolina, a state with no restrictions on owning exotic big cats. Unlike in other states where such animals required permits and inspections, there were no legal barriers, no oversight, and no regulations preventing her from housing a wild predator inside her home. She had raised him from a kitten, treating him like a pet. He lounged on her furniture, followed her from room to room, and slept at the foot of her bed. But there had been signs. Aggressive swipes with claws extended, guttural growls when startled, a deep bite that had left a scar on her arm months prior. Friends had warned her that exotic animal experts cautioned against keeping caracals as pets, but Olivia was convinced she understood him better than anyone else could. At 10:15 a.m., Olivia was on a video call with her younger sister Erin Carter, who lived out of the state. Erin later recalled that Olivia had been standing near the kitchen counter chatting casually as she prepared Kai's raw meat breakfast. Kai was pacing nearby, his ears pinned back, tail twitching, a posture Erin had noticed before but never thought much about. Olivia had always joked that he was impatient for food, brushing off concerns, as if Kai's restlessness was nothing more than a quirky habit. Seconds later, everything changed. Kai launched forward without warning, his claws raking deep across Olivia's face before she could react. The phone jolted as Olivia stumbled backwards, screaming, the image blurring with violent movement. Erin's panicked voice rang through the call, but there was no response. Kai latched onto Olivia's arm, his powerful jaws clamping down to the bone. A loud crash echoed through the phone as furniture scraped across the tile floor, Olivia struggling to break free. The phone, knocked from her grasp, landed face up, still transmitting. Erin listened as the sounds of Olivia's struggle filled the call. Screams, heavy breathing, the deep growls of the caracal. She ended the call and immediately dialed 911. The dispatcher answered, but Erin was calling from out of state, and her location routed her to her local emergency services. She quickly explained the situation, but the dispatcher couldn't send help directly. Erin needed to call 911 for Olivia's location. They provided her with the correct 10-digit number for emergency services in North Carolina. Before dialing again, Erin frantically searched her phone for Olivia's address. In her panic, she couldn't recall it immediately, scrolling through old messages and emails until she found it. Only then did she call the emergency services for Olivia's location, relaying the full address. At 10:27 a.m., first responders were finally dispatched to the scene with animal control officers. By the time they arrived, it was already too late. Emergency responders broke through the front door to find Kai still hunched over Olivia's lifeless body, his ears flattened, muscles coiled, fur bristling. He didn't flee, he didn't hide. He was guarding his kill. The animal control officers trained in handling dangerous exotic animals moved in with catch poles and tranquilizer darts. Kai let out a low growl but didn't resist, his instincts still locked in predator mode. As they restrained him, he licked the blood from his muzzle. Erin had already hung up, but when emergency services finally arrived, she received the call she had been dreading. The dispatcher confirmed what she already feared. Olivia was unresponsive. The paramedics and police had entered the house, but there was nothing they could do. Olivia was pronounced dead at the scene. The medical examiner's report confirmed that Olivia suffered fatal blood loss from deep lacerations to her face, arms, and neck. But the final injury had been a bite to the throat that severed her carotid artery. A precision kill, exactly how caracals take down prey in the wild. The story spread quickly, sparking renewed debates over the dangers of private exotic animal ownership. Experts pointed out that while caracals are smaller than big cats, they're still wild animals, with reflexes, strength, and instincts that no human can ever fully control. Still, no legislation was made banning the ownership of such animals. As for Kai, he was transferred to a wildlife sanctuary placed in a secure habitat away from human interaction. Officials ruled that he would not be euthanized, as the attack was deemed a natural predatory response rather than abnormal aggression. It was a quiet evening in Hampshire, England, where Brandon had spent countless hours immersed in his passion for reptiles. His bedroom, tucked away in a corner of the house, was a sanctuary, a space where snakes and tarantulas lived in harmony, all under his expert care. He was a herpetologist, not just a casual enthusiast, and his collection of 10 snakes and 12 tarantulas was more than just a hobby, it was his life's work. From a young age, Brandon had been captivated by the fascinating world of reptiles. At 10, he was hooked on nature documentaries, mesmerized by the slithering movements of snakes and the silent predatory grace of tarantulas. By 15, he was holding his first snake in his hands, and from that point, his collection and knowledge only grew. Among all of Brandon's animals, one stood out above the rest. Tiny, a 7.9-foot-long African rock python. She was an impressive creature, destined to grow even larger, with the potential to reach lengths of 13 feet or more. Tiny had been with him for years, and what began as a small, manageable pet had transformed into a massive, muscle-bound serpent, coiling with strength and power. Tiny was usually kept in a secure enclosure, a large reinforced glass tank designed to house her safely. However, Brandon often allowed her out to roam freely during feeding times or when he spent time handling her. Despite her size and strength, he treated Tiny like family, caring for her with the same devotion as he did for his other reptiles. In his eyes, Tiny was more than a pet, she was a companion, an integral part of his world. But as Tiny grew, so did the risks. A python's constriction isn't an act of aggression, it's a calculated move for survival, an instinct honed over millennia. Pythons only squeeze when they're preparing to strike, when they're ready to feed. But with Tiny's increasing size and strength, Brandon knew that handling her required more caution. No longer could he drape her casually around his shoulders or let her explore freely as he had when she was smaller. The risks of handling an 8-foot python were simply too great. Yet Brandon's love for the snake often clouded his judgment. On the day everything went wrong, he allowed Tiny to roam freely in his room, underestimating the danger in doing so. August 25, 2017 began like any other day. Brandon, a landscaper by trade, returned home after work eager to relax. He lived with his parents, who were downstairs at the time. Brandon's usual routine was to head upstairs to change before returning downstairs to spend time with his reptiles. But this evening, something was different. Just after heading up to his bedroom, a sudden ominous thud echoed through the house. There was no cry of pain, no shout for help, just silence. Brandon's father, hearing the noise from the living room, grew concerned and went to investigate. When he opened the door to Brandon's room, the sight that greeted him was nothing short of horrifying. There, on the floor, was Brandon motionless, his body sprawled out on the floor in a way that was entirely unnatural. Tiny was nowhere to be found. Panic gripped his heart as he called for Brandon's mother to dial emergency services. They rushed upstairs, but their attempts to revive Brandon were futile. He remained unresponsive. 8 long minutes passed before the paramedics arrived, but it was too late. The 31-year-old man, once so full of life and enthusiasm for his reptiles, was dead. Tiny, for her part, had slithered off into a corner of the room, seemingly content, her behavior eerily calm in contrast to the chaos unfolding around her. The investigation into Brandon's death was swift, but the cause of his demise was unclear. The coroner's report indicated asphyxiation, but there were no marks on his body to suggest a violent struggle. There were no bruises or bite marks, nothing to indicate that Tiny had attacked him in the way many would expect from a predatory animal. Snake expert Professor Scott Boback offered a different perspective. According to him, constriction alone wasn't the most likely cause of death in this case. Instead, he suggested that Tiny's grip might have caused a sudden restriction of blood flow to Brandon's brain, triggering a cardiac arrest. The massive pressure from the python's coiling could have caused Brandon to lose consciousness in mere seconds, and without immediate intervention, his heart would have stopped, leading to his tragic death. Further examination of the scene revealed something curious. Despite the absence of bite marks or signs of a struggle, the experts couldn't shake the feeling that something had gone wrong, something beyond just a simple accident. Veterinarian John Cooper, who had joined the investigation, took a closer look at Tiny's recently shed skin. There were no signs that Brandon had fought for his life, no frantic claw marks or scratches. Tiny's skin was intact, and there were no indications of struggle. This was an unsettling discovery, raising more questions than answers. Despite all the evidence pointing toward an accidental death, there remained a lingering suspicion that Tiny had somehow been responsible. Could it be that the python had been acting out of affection for her owner? Snakes, after all, aren't known for the same kind of attachment that a dog or a cat might display. Their interactions with humans are often driven by instinct, whether it's for warmth, security, or simply the comfort of being close to their handler. In Tiny's case, it was possible that the snake had wrapped herself around Brandon not out of aggression, but because she had felt a need for closeness. The gripping power of the python, combined with Brandon's inability to escape, might have turned into something deadly, even if it was never the snake's intention. Adding to the mystery was the discovery of a faint rib fracture on Brandon's body, likely caused by the python's powerful coils. This too suggested that Tiny's grip had been too much, that the strength of her coils had overwhelmed Brandon's body in a way that he couldn't escape. Months after the tragedy, Brandon's parents faced a difficult decision. Despite their grief, they couldn't bring themselves to put down the python. Tiny had been an integral part of their son's life, and they didn't see her as a vicious animal. However, her growing size and the weight of the tragedy led them to rehome her. Tiny was sent to the National Center for Reptile Welfare at Hadlow College in Tunbridge, Kent. On June 12, 2018, the humid Florida air clung to the crowded rental home in Pinecrest, where music and laughter filled the space. The air conditioning struggled against the heat of 20 bodies packed into the living room, plastic cups in hand, as friends and coworkers from Sunshine Market drank and talked over the pulsing music. It was a typical Saturday night, until Hunter Roberts decided it was time to unveil the surprise he had been hinting at all evening. At 34 years old, Hunter had earned a reputation as a risk-taker. Tall and lean, with sun-bleached hair, he had spent his childhood exploring the swamps and backwaters of Central Florida, drawn to the wildlife that most people avoided. While other kids played baseball or rode bikes through the neighborhood, Hunter waded through murky water, flipping over logs in search of snakes and lizards. His fascination bordered on obsession. By the time he was a teenager, he had already built a collection of reptiles, keeping them in makeshift enclosures in his bedroom. Teachers at his high school remembered him as the kid who always had a snake draped around his shoulders, while neighbors grew accustomed to the occasional escaped lizard turning up in their yards. Even as an adult working as a produce manager at Sunshine Market, his real passion remained reptiles. Every spare dollar went toward his collection, buying new enclosures, feeding live prey, or upgrading his backyard shed into what he proudly called his herp room. His roommates Michael Dawson and Tyler Freeman tolerated it at first, but as the collection grew, so did their concern. Hunter had always been drawn to larger, more aggressive species, dismissing the risks with a cocky grin. When he first brought home a 5-foot Argentine tegu, they had argued about it, but Hunter waved them off. That pattern continued until one day he brought home something far more dangerous, something that wouldn't just bite, but kill. 3 months earlier, during a solo trip to the Everglades, Hunter had captured something far more dangerous than the usual snakes and lizards he brought home, a fully grown Nile monitor lizard. At over 6 feet long and weighing nearly 30 pounds, the muscular reptile was among the largest specimens ever spotted in the region. Native to sub-Saharan Africa, Nile monitors are one of the most formidable lizards in the world, built for endurance, speed, and efficient predation. Their razor-sharp teeth are designed for slicing through flesh, while their powerful claws make them skilled climbers, burrowers, and aggressive combatants when threatened. Unlike other large reptiles that rely on ambush tactics, Nile monitors are active hunters, chasing down prey with surprising speed, capable of sprinting up to 18 miles per hour. Their highly acidic saliva allows bacteria to fester in their mouths, creating a venom-like effect when they bite. A wound from a Nile monitor doesn't just bleed, it festers, leading to rapid infection. Despite being classified as an invasive species in Florida, their adaptability and aggressive survival tactics have allowed them to thrive. Wildlife officials warn that Nile monitors should never be kept as pets, as they remain unpredictable even when raised in captivity. Territorial and prone to violent outbursts, they use their powerful tails as whips, delivering bone-crushing blows before lashing out with claws and teeth. But Hunter refused to acknowledge the danger, ignoring warning signs that captured monitors should be reported and euthanized. He smuggled Ra home and set up an enclosure in the backyard shed. He named it after the Egyptian sun god, boasting about its intelligence and strength, but his friends simply called it Hunter's mistake. By the time the party had been going for hours, the drinks had been flowing and the house was hot and stuffy. Guests milled around, laughing and chatting, unaware that the night's entertainment would soon turn deadly. At 11:45 p.m., Hunter clapped his hands for attention, grinning as he boasted about what he had brought back from the Everglades. The shed had been closed up all day, and the heat inside would have pushed Ra into a state of heightened aggression. But Hunter didn't think twice as he disappeared outside. His guests, fueled by alcohol and curiosity, waited for him to return. Moments later, Hunter stepped back into the living room, the massive Nile monitor draped over his forearm. The room fell silent as people instinctively backed away. Unlike a harmless pet lizard, Ra's body twisted and writhed, his sharp claws digging into Hunter's skin as his powerful tail lashed. His yellow eyes darted, scanning the unfamiliar space. Muscles coiled tight beneath patterned scales. Guests later described the atmosphere as uneasy. Something about the way the lizard moved didn't feel right. But Hunter, emboldened by alcohol, dismissed their concerns, laughing as he held Ra up for everyone to see. He encouraged people to touch the scaly hide, insisting the animal was harmless if handled properly. Then Ra struck. The lizard lunged forward, its jaws clamping down on Hunter's wrist with shocking speed. The razor-sharp teeth sank in deep, puncturing muscle and tearing flesh. Hunter let out a sharp yell, trying to shake the animal off, but Ra's grip only tightened. Nile monitors are ambush predators using their teeth to inflict massive wounds and their powerful limbs to rip flesh from bone. Blood splattered onto the tile floor as the lizard began violently thrashing its head, its instincts mistaking hunter for prey. Panic erupted in the room. Guests screamed, some bolting for the door while others froze in shock. Hunter stumbled away, crashing into the coffee table, knocking drinks to the ground. His attempts to pry Ra off only made it worse. The lizard, now fully in feeding mode, latched onto his forearm and began clawing at his chest. Michael and another guest rushed forward, grabbing Hunter's shoulders to steady him as he fell to his knees, blood pouring from his arm and streaking down his torso. The deep gashes from Ra's claws exposed muscle, and as Hunter struggled, the monitor lunged again, this time sinking its teeth into his throat. The room fell into chaos. Hunter gurgled, his hands clutching at the lizard, but Ra's powerful bite force and serrated teeth dug in deeper. A sickening, ripping sound filled the air as the monitor began tearing at the soft tissue of his neck, blood spraying across the floor. The guests who remained were helpless, some shouting, others dialing 911, but none daring to step closer. The attack didn't stop. As Hunter collapsed onto his back, convulsing from blood loss, Ra released his grip and latched onto his face. Clawed feet pinned his shoulders as the monitor ripped into his cheek, stripping flesh from bone in the way it would with prey in the wild. By the time emergency responders arrived 12 minutes later, Hunter wasn't moving. The first responders forced their way inside, met with the horrifying scene of Ra still tearing into Hunter's body. Blood covered the floor, his face barely recognizable beneath gaping wounds, and the lizard was feasting. Firefighters and paramedics trained in handling Florida's wildlife emergencies worked quickly to contain the agitated, blood-covered monitor. Using catch poles and heavy gloves, they managed to wrestle Ra away from the body, but the damage had already been done. Hunter Roberts was pronounced dead at 12:17 a.m. The autopsy confirmed severe blood loss and trauma to the throat, face, and arms, with bite wounds consistent with predatory feeding behavior. Large portions of his cheek, neck, and forearm had been consumed before first responders arrived. In the aftermath, wildlife officials euthanized Ra, confirming that the monitor had displayed normal predatory behavior for a wild-caught specimen. Experts reviewing the case emphasized that Nile monitors are not pets, and their powerful hunting instincts make them extremely dangerous in captivity. For the partygoers who had witnessed the attack, the trauma lingered. Some refused to speak about it, unable to erase the image of Hunter's final moments from their minds. Others struggled with guilt, wondering if they should have stepped in sooner, though none could have predicted how quickly the situation escalated. Hunter's roommates moved out within weeks, unable to live in the house where it had happened. The few guests who remained at the party that night eventually drifted apart, bound only by the horrific memory that none of them would ever fully escape. For those who had known Hunter personally, his death was a brutal reminder that wild instincts cannot be tamed. In the end, he was never in control, not of Ra and not of what happened that night. It was a warm, calm evening in the rolling hills of Ohio, where a man named Sam Mazzola made his living from exotic animals. Sam's property, surrounded by dense woods, was home to various wild creatures: bears, tigers, wolves, all living in enclosures or roaming the grounds. To many, Sam was a controversial figure, revered by some for his expertise and loathed by others for his apparent disregard for animal welfare. Born and raised in Ohio, Sam's passion for animals began early. As a child, he developed an interest in collecting and caring for creatures, a hobby that gradually grew into a full-fledged obsession. Over time, Sam's fascination with exotic wildlife led him to accumulate a variety of dangerous animals. Sam's collection included lions, tigers, and bears, dangerous creatures that, despite their raw power, he believed could be tamed and cared for. He often exhibited them at fairs and public events, offering people a chance to get close to the animals. Sam justified his actions by claiming he was educating the public about conservation, but the truth was more complex. He faced numerous allegations of animal cruelty and neglect. The United States Department of Agriculture had cited him multiple times for violating the Animal Welfare Act, including failing to provide adequate veterinary care and proper living conditions. His license was revoked in 2009, and a fine of $21,000 was imposed for the violations. Yet Sam was allowed to continue housing his animals. Despite the controversies, Sam pressed on with his exhibitions. His most famous animal was Bart, a 500-pound black bear. Sam had raised Bart from a cub, and their bond was well known in the community. The bear would stand on its hind legs when Sam approached, eager for the routine feeding. The two seemed inseparable, and Sam often told visitors how much he trusted Bart, despite the whispers of danger surrounding such a powerful creature. But bonds like these can be fragile, especially when outsiders become involved. Brett Condra, a 24-year-old Ohioan, had long been fascinated by animals. His childhood was spent exploring creeks and rivers in northeastern Ohio, discovering fishing sports and learning to respect the wildlife around him. He would often spend his weekends camping and catching bullfrogs with blades of grass, always surrounded by nature. His family supported his love for animals, and by his 20s, Brent sought work that allowed him to stay close to his passion. When Sam offered him a job on his property, Brent ignored his father's warnings about Sam's business practices and the risks of working with wild animals. The opportunity felt like a dream come true, one he couldn't bring himself to resist. On August 19, 2010, Brent was preparing for the evening feeding when tragedy struck. The sun hung low in the sky, casting long shadows across the property. With a bucket of raw meat in hand, Brent approached Bart's 15-foot by 20-foot enclosure. Over the years, Brent had grown confident in handling the animals, particularly Bart, who seemed to recognize him and had always been docile in his presence. As usual, the bear stood up on its hind legs, eagerly awaiting its meal. In the early days, Brent had been nervous around Bart, but over time he believed he had earned the bear's trust. He approached with calm and steady movements, respecting the animal's wild nature. Slowly, he unlocked the door to the enclosure and let Bart out. Feeding Bart outside his cage had become a routine, one the bear had grown accustomed to. Brent, confident in their bond, never imagined how quickly trust could shatter. Without warning, Bart lunged at Brent, grabbing him with powerful claws and slamming him to the ground. The 500-pound bear, normally calm, had transformed into a savage force. Brent had no time to react. Bart's claws raked across his body and its teeth sank into his face, tearing through flesh and bone. Brent struggled to break free, but the bear was too strong. Its claws shredded his chest and arms, while its powerful jaws crushed his hand and shattered his ribs. Blood pooled around him as Bart continued the brutal attack. Sam, who had been preparing other animals for the night, heard the commotion and rushed to the scene. He shouted at Bart, trying to distract the bear long enough to stop the attack. With a fire extinguisher in hand, Sam managed to force Bart back into the cage. But the damage was done. Brent lay bleeding on the ground, his body torn apart by the bear's assault. Sam immediately called 911 and Brent was rushed to Metro Health Medical Center. Despite all efforts, Brent died from his injuries shortly after 1:30 a.m. on August 20th, 2010. The coroner's report confirmed that Brent's cause of death was blunt and sharp force trauma consistent with a bear attack. Sam, in a brief interview, spoke carefully about the incident, declining to provide details but mentioning that Brent had been Bart's favorite caretaker. He added that while he respected Brent's family's wishes, he believed Brent would not have wanted Bart euthanized. However, Brent's father and ex-wife insisted on the bear's euthanasia, and a veterinarian carried it out. The tragedy didn't end with Brent's death. In 2011, Sam Mazzola was found lifeless in his home, an eerie scene that only deepened the mystery surrounding his life. Sam's body was discovered handcuffed face down on his waterbed wearing a leather mask. The autopsy revealed asphyxiation with a bedroom toy lodged in his throat. The circumstances of his death remain unsolved, adding to the strange and unsettling nature of his legacy. Jerome and Sandra Harold were a happily married couple. Their home in Stamford, Connecticut had once been filled with the sounds of their daughter Susan's laughter and the busy hum of daily life. But as time passed and Susan married, the house fell silent. The couple, now alone, found themselves consumed by an emptiness that lingered in the halls. The house, once vibrant, now felt hollow. In an attempt to fill the void, they made a decision few would dare to make. They brought home a 3-day-old chimpanzee, choosing to raise it as their new child. The price was steep, $50,000, but to Sandra and Jerome it seemed worth it. They named the chimp Travis, after Sandra's favorite country music star, Travis Tritt. From the moment they brought him home, Travis became their world. They pampered him as if he were their own child, bathing him, feeding him, and even brushing his teeth. He slept in their bed, ate at their table, and joined them for outings. Travis quickly became more than just a pet, he was family. As the years passed, Travis grew bigger and stronger, and his relationship with the Harolds deepened. The couple even built a special room in their house for him, hanging tires from ropes for him to swing on. He learned to do things most people wouldn't expect of a chimpanzee, opening doors, using the remote control, even browsing pictures on the family computer. His charm and friendly nature made him a local celebrity. Neighbors, police officers, and even strangers recognized Travis as the beloved chimpanzee living in Stamford. He was known for his quirky habits, his obsession with baseball, his taste for ice cream, and his ability to log into the computer. The Harolds couldn't have asked for a better companion. But as with all creatures, time would change Travis in ways they never anticipated. In 2003, a strange incident set the stage for what was to come. Jerome, Sandra, and Travis were stuck in traffic when a passerby threw an empty soda can into their car, striking Travis. Without hesitation, Travis unbuckled his seatbelt, opened the door, and chased after the culprit. The situation spiraled out of control, with Travis eluding officers for nearly 2 hours. He eventually returned to the car, but the spectacle led to a new law in Connecticut, banning the ownership of primates heavier than 50 pounds. Despite the chaos, Travis was exempted from the law, largely due to his status as a well-known, previously trained animal. Everything seemed to be fine in the family of Jerome and Sandra. With their animal, they appeared to be a happy couple, living a life that was calm and stable. But in 2004, tragedy struck. Jerome, after a long battle with stomach cancer, passed away. Sandra, now alone, was engulfed by grief. The house, once full of life, fell into darkness. Her sorrow had a profound effect on Travis, who had always seen Jerome as his alpha. As the months passed, Travis's behavior began to change. He had reached adulthood, now weighing over 200 pounds. The Stamford Animal Control Department voiced concerns about his size and strength, advising Sarah that it would no longer be practical to keep him in her home. But Sandra, still mourning Jerome, ignored their warnings. She withdrew from social life, spending her days sitting by the porch staring at the sunsets in a daze. The isolation took its toll on Travis. Without proper exercise, he grew overweight. His once shiny fur turned dull, and his body became flabby. The energetic chimpanzee who had once been the center of their world was now a shadow of his former self. By February 15, 2009, Sandra's emotional state had deteriorated further. On that day, she invited her longtime friend, Charla Nash, over for a visit. Charla had been a frequent guest at the Harold home, and Travis knew her well. After spending the afternoon at Mohegan Sun Casino, Charla and Sandra returned home, but something was off. Travis, usually eager for attention, was unusually quiet. His favorite ice cream sat untouched, and the TV and computer, two of his favorite things, were off. Concerned but not yet alarmed, Sandra mixed Xanax into Travis's tea before heading to bed, hoping to calm him. The next morning, February 16, 2009, Sandra woke to find Travis acting strangely. He wandered aimlessly around the yard, unresponsive to her calls. His movements were slow and his gaze seemed vacant. Growing more uneasy, Sandra called Charla to come over and help. The two women hoped that Travis would calm down with his favorite toy, a red Tickle Me Elmo. But when they approached him in the yard, something snapped. Seeing the toy, Travis went into a violent frenzy, attacking Charla with terrifying force. Travis threw Charla to the ground, and before Sandra could react, he sank his teeth into Charla's face. In an instant, he ripped off her lips, nose, and eyelids with brutal precision. Sandra, in panic, grabbed a shovel and struck Travis several times, but the chimp, unrelenting, continued his savage attack. His strength was overwhelming, and Sandra's efforts to stop him were futile. She rushed inside to grab a kitchen knife, praying it would be enough to stop the violence. She returned to the yard, the knife trembling in her hand, and plunged it into Travis's back. For a brief moment, Travis stopped, glaring at her with wild eyes. Then, as if nothing had happened, he turned back to Charla and resumed his attack with even more force. Charla's screams echoed through the neighborhood as Travis tore into her face. Seeing no other option, Sandra fled to her car, locked herself inside, and frantically called 911. The dispatcher's voice remained calm. "What's the problem with your friend?" she asked. "He ripped her face off. He's trying to attack me." Sandra screamed into the phone, her voice a raw, terrified cry. The dispatcher urged Sandra to stay safe, but Sandra could do nothing. Charla lay unconscious in the yard, her body mangled by Travis's relentless assault. The horror unfolded before Sandra's eyes as the chimpanzee continued his violence without hesitation. When Officer Frank Chiafiri arrived, he was met with an unimaginable sight. Travis, still enraged, was roaming the yard, attacking the police car. The chimp smashed the passenger window and unlocked the door, his anger undiminished. Fearing for his life, Officer Chiafari opened fire, shooting Travis 4 times. The chimp stumbled into the house, collapsed on his bed, and died. Charla was rushed to the hospital where she underwent multiple surgeries to reconstruct her face. Her injuries were severe. She lost her left hand, along with several fingers on her right hand. The trauma affected not only Charla, but also the medical team who cared for her, many of whom sought counseling after the experience. The physical and emotional scars left by the attack were deep. A toxicology report revealed traces of Xanax in Travis's system, which may have contributed to his aggressive behavior. Some speculated that Charla's altered appearance, her changed hair color and curls, may have startled Travis. But the cause of the attack remains uncertain. Charla now lives with the physical and psychological scars, a constant reminder of the day her life was nearly taken by a creature she had once trusted. It was a cold, crisp evening in the Penrose neighborhood of St. Louis, Missouri, the sun long gone and the city beginning to settle into the quiet of the night. Dennis Moore, a retired landscaper in his 60s, had just kissed his wife Melvina goodbye. She was off to her night shift at the nursing home, and he was preparing for his usual walk through the neighborhood. For years, this routine had been a constant in his life, a time for reflection and a break from the duties of the day. Dennis, in his simple jacket and cap, locked the door behind him and set out down the street. The world seemed to slow as he walked, the gentle breeze rustling the leaves and the muted sounds of the city blending into the background. It was during these walks that he found a kind of peace, a break from the chaos of the world, if only for a little while. The Penrose neighborhood, a tight-knit community, had always been a peaceful place. Neighbors knew one another by name, and help was always just a knock away. Dennis and Melvina had made their home here for years, and their lives had settled into a comfortable rhythm. Dennis, always the Good Samaritan, tended to the lawns and gardens of his neighbors, helping the elderly and offering a friendly smile to everyone he met. It was a life of quiet satisfaction, one built on love and community. But as Dennis walked those familiar streets that evening, something was different. Unbeknownst to him, the streets of Penrose had become the hunting ground of a pack of dogs, wild and aggressive. Pit bulls, known for their strength and tenacity, had been roaming freely through the neighborhood for days, causing fear and unease among the residents. They had become a dangerous presence, unafraid of people, territorial, and relentless in their pursuit of prey. Over the past several days, neighbors had noticed the dogs jumping fences, barking loudly, and roaming in packs of 6, moving in tight formations like a wolf pack, driven by hunger and aggression. Dennis was nearing the end of his walk, just 2 blocks from his home, when the danger that had been lurking in the shadows finally found its target. His phone was dying and he planned to text Melvina once he arrived home. But as he rounded the corner and approached his block, the sudden sound of growling broke the stillness of the night. From the darkness of the alleyway, a pack of pit bulls emerged, their eyes gleaming with ferocity. They surrounded Dennis, their bodies tense, teeth bared, and growls filling the air. He attempted to back away, but the dogs were too fast, too powerful. They closed in on him, and before he could react, they lunged. The attack was swift and brutal. Dennis, despite his strength, had no chance against the sheer power of the attack. The dogs tore into him, their massive jaws sinking into his flesh, dragging him to the ground. The force of the attack was overwhelming. One of the pit bulls bit into his leg while another latched onto his arm, pulling him toward the pack's center. His cries for help were swallowed by the night as the dogs consumed him alive, the pack's primal hunger unstoppable. As the hours passed, the neighborhood remained unaware of the tragedy unfolding just a few blocks away. It wasn't until a neighbor taking out the trash stumbled upon the gruesome scene that the authorities were alerted. A call was made and the police arrived quickly, finding Dennis's body already decaying from the vicious attack. The dogs had torn him apart, leaving nothing but the remnants of what had once been a man who had loved his family and his community. Melvina, at work that night, had grown increasingly worried when Dennis didn't call at his usual time. She tried reaching him several times, but her calls went unanswered. By 5 a.m., she knew something was terribly wrong. When the police finally rang, she picked up only to hear a voice she didn't recognize. The officer on the other end asked if she was Dennis Moore's wife. Her heart sank as she nodded, but the officer refused to explain over the phone. When she arrived home later that morning, her worst fears were confirmed. She was shown only her husband's head, the rest of his body too damaged to be seen. The trauma was unimaginable and the shock left her numb. The community, which had always felt like a safe haven, was now marred by the brutal death of a beloved resident. Dennis Moore, the kind-hearted man who had always been there for others, was gone, taken by the very animals that had been allowed to roam unchecked. The investigation into the attack revealed that the dogs responsible for the savage assault were part of a larger pack. 3 of the dogs had been captured, but the police believed there were still 3 more at large. Residents of the neighborhood, already shaken by the attack, grew increasingly fearful. The dogs, known for their territorial behavior, had been seen frequently around the area, showing aggression toward anyone they encountered. They were wild, untrained, and without the necessary discipline to live safely within a human community. In total, the 6 dogs were reported to have been roaming across an area of about 500 square blocks, causing havoc as they moved through yards, alleyways, and streets. For months before the attack, neighbors had reported the pit bulls to animal control, but their warnings had gone unheeded. It wasn't until Dennis's death that authorities took action, but by then it was too late. The damage had been done, and the neighborhood would never be the same. The presence of the remaining 3 dogs, still unaccounted for, kept the residents on edge, afraid to walk the streets they once called home. Melvina, consumed by grief, suspected the dogs had been neglected or intentionally trained to be aggressive, perhaps fed raw meat to fuel their savage behavior. Without knowing the owner, the true cause of the attack remained a mystery. While pit bulls are often unfairly stigmatized, their aggression is usually the result of mistreatment. In this case, negligence had turned them into predators, roaming unchecked and becoming a deadly force in the Penrose neighborhood. Dennis Moore's tragic death underscored the dangers of failing to properly care for animals. It left a lasting mark on the community and raised an unsettling question. Are certain breeds like pit bulls simply too risky as household pets? Thanks for watching this compilation. Not done watching yet? Click on the next video right now.